Hello, everyone. I hope all is well. Today is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and an important day, and also a day of national service. So do something really good around your home today. Do something for your family, or do something for a neighbor. So I wanted to do this quick video for you. I'll try to make it quick, but it's a little bit of a review of some of the content. A couple people asked about this, asked if we could do a little bit of a video. Maybe somebody missed class. Maybe there's just a couple of content topics that you feel like you need a little bit more information about, and just to help you in some of your studying, just going to do this quick review. So feel free to use the video, choose to or not, or use part of it if that's helpful for you. Okay, everyone. So first and foremost, do be aware of the map for the Islamic empires. Keep in mind, this is in the same time period as the Franks, the Carolingians, also the Byzantine Empire is starting to shrink during the time period of the Islamic Empire. But we look at the beginnings of the Islamic Empire, very connected to the religion of Islam, attach that to the region of Mecca, and this will be in the early 600s. We see in 622 to 632, the Islamic Empire first become a group of followers who are following the Prophet Muhammad, and what he is representing as the translations from Allah, which become ultimately the Quran. The initial increase in the rise of the Ummah, or the followers of Islam, becomes very connected to the cities of Mecca and Medina, also areas that are south, maybe a little bit more fertile parts of the Arabian Peninsula. The four caliphs that follow the time period of Muhammad end up becoming also big into conquest. And we see a large area of northern Africa, also areas surrounding Syria, Antioch, the areas in kind of the Middle East, Israel area, all the way into Persia. So some of the first four caliphs are definitely representative of conquests. This will also continue into the Umayyad dynasty. The Umayyads are in power from 656 to 750, and the Abbasids come in from 750 to 900. And in the time period of the Abbasids, we don't see really large-scale expansion. Okay, for the most part, most of the expansion has already happened, but just giving you a sense of some of the maps. When we talk about Persia, we're looking at like modern day Iraq and Iran, and the area of Baghdad being significant here. When we talk about Syria, we're talking about the area of Damascus, like near kind of modern day Jerusalem, near Jordan, near, Damascus is in Syria. When we talk about Cairo, or Northern Africa, we might be considering Egypt, and then of course all the way into Andalusia, which is modern day Spain, and on the eastern part, all the way into Sindh, in the area of modern day, the what was at the time the Indian Peninsula. Okay, so just have an idea of that map and kind of the way in which the Islamic Empire will grow over time. After the Abbasids, of course, there will be continued Islamic empire, and that includes like the Ottomans and other groups as well. Just kind of keep in mind we're looking at a particular period of time with some of the first Islamic empires. Okay, so a couple of really big takeaways with these early slides, because I think this is a part of the entire content area that many of you will be most familiar with. Remember that prior to the development of the religion of Islam, the group of people who were living in the Arabian Peninsula are known as the Bedouin, largely. There are a variety of different activities. We're talking about a nomadic group of people who are politically organized in family clans. Generally, it's family names that become most significant. So there's dominant clan groups. The Quraysh, for example, might be a dominant clan group at one time that has its like headquarters in a sense in Mecca. There's also a great deal of geographic types of things that become instrumental. This is an area which is much more desert in a good part of the area. The fertile land is in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula, so agriculture is kind of few and far between. Most of the economic activities for the Bedouin include herding, so they are basing their culture on a nomadic lifestyle of animal herding. They also have an incredibly rich culture in terms of of oral history. In some cases, they're competing for resources, so we see conflicts between the clans. Some of those conflicts will continue under the Islamic Empire, but for the most part, just have a sense of some of the Bedouin culture and some of its significance prior to Muhammad and the development of what becomes the religion of Islam. Okay, one of the things that we talked about early on was a little bit about the role of the Kaaba. The Kaaba is today a very significant structure. It is where it is in Mecca, and this is the city where all Muslims around the world pray 5 times a day in the direction of Mecca, in the direction of the Kaaba. The Kaaba is seen to have ancient roots. Not only was it present in the time of Muhammad in the early 600s in the city of Mecca, but the Kaaba was also present. Devout Muslims believe it is attached to a story about Abraham. Islam is one of the Abrahamic faiths, like Christianity and Judaism, and the root story is about Abraham, his wife Hagar, and their son Ishmael, and they have some challenges that are met by time in the Kaaba. And so there is a significance to the building of the Kaaba, even in the time period of the 600s. And in the 600s, the Kaaba was used as a center for pilgrimages. So it was used as a center for prayer, but not for Islam. Islam was not yet developed, and there was a great deal of polytheistic religions and a variety of gods that might have been considered during the pilgrimages to the Kaaba. There was also a lot of economic activity that was happening in Mecca. It was a cultural center as well as a trade center, and around the Kaaba there was a great deal of business activity. The dominant tribe that centered in Mecca was involved in some of that economic activity. Okay, so threats to the practices around the Kaaba also are to some degree economic threats. In the time period of the 600s, something that we want to pay attention to is the role of Muhammad. Devout Muslims see Muhammad as a prophet, not as a figure that is divine, but as somebody who is basically in the position of conveying the words of Allah to a community of believers. Muhammad is believed to be born in Mecca to a merchant family. He's orphaned at a young age, so he does have some issues in his own childhood, but he also has a strong connection to merchants, and something we see as a consistent theme throughout the Islamic Empire is a great deal of merchant, the merchant activity. It's celebrated because it's seen to be very valuable because it's also connected to Muhammad. He likely did not have a very formal education and began trade as a very young man. He did become a individual who worked with a widow by the name of Khadijah. They do get married. She's a little older than he is, but they have for a long time a monogamous relationship. At a certain point, Khadijah dies, so he continues and has a variety of additional wives after that. There are some issues that Muhammad faces in the community that he's in. He finds some of the values of the Bedouin being, kind of based on things like greed and issues that don't to him feel like they are part of, the values that should be the proper values. So he does remove himself from society. He critiques society a little bit. He meditates in isolation. And it's during one of these meditations where he is visited by the angel Gabriel, and this will begin the beginnings of the religion of Islam. Okay, so at about the age of 40, devout Muslims believe that Muhammad is said to have heard the voice of the angel Gabriel telling him that he is going to be the messenger of Allah. And, according to tradition, Muhammad says no, he's not able to do that because he is unlettered. He is not literate. And, the angel Gabriel tells him, he is the chosen messenger. He will ultimately refer to himself as the last of the prophets. Okay, so he will be in a line of prophets, including Jesus, Abraham, Moses. The Quran will ultimately identify quite a few prophets that would also be common in Christianity and Judaism. Those prophets also are sharing in some ways the message of God, but Muhammad will see himself as the more perfect prophet because he will be sharing what it is the words of Allah Allah with believers, and also the last of the prophets. And Muhammad continues to take in revelations in his time in his life, and those revelations are what are recorded in the Quran. The Quran is meant to be in Arabic and the words of Allah, not the words of Muhammad. So Muhammad is communicating what he was told by Allah, and that is representative. There's also something known as the Hadith, which includes stories about Muhammad or sayings of Muhammad. So there are ways that Muslims can find out a role model in Muhammad by consulting the Hadith. Okay, so we do see some challenges for Muhammad in the area of Mecca, and basically he is followed by some, including a small group at first. He is sharing some of the revelations that the angel Gabriel had shared with him, and he is, in some cases, pushed back on by some of the commercial elites, some of the main powers in Mecca. Some people might be worried about economics. They see Mecca being reduced in terms of its economic power, and there becomes a lot of pushback against Muhammad. In 622, he and his supporters will retreat from Mecca to Yathrib. If you look back on the map in the city of the prophet, it becomes renamed the city of the prophet, known as the city of Medina. So Yathrib becomes Medina, and Muhammad and his followers will spend some significant time there. 622 is a notable year. That is the year of the Hijra. This is the first date on the official lunar calendar of Islam, but this speaks to a flight that Muhammad will make with his followers to Medina. At Medina, we do see Muhammad, who is called there. There's actually a group of Jews that seek out some of his consultation. There's a variety of things that Muhammad will do, but he also builds his group of community known as the Ummah, okay, Dar al-Islam. This becomes the group of people who are followers of the word of Allah and start to commit to what become the 5 pillars of Islam. He does have quite a few supporters, and in some cases is in a position to defend his supporters through some military means. So in Medina, there are threats to the growing religion of Islam, and there is a way in which the group of people defend themselves. So, Muhammad becomes not only a religious leader sharing some of the words of Allah, there's also a political and military role for Muhammad as well. He does come back to Mecca and actually will bring 10,000 people back to Mecca, which ultimately surrenders to Muhammad. And so Mecca, in a sense, gets claimed for the Islamic Empire. Not yet an Islamic Empire, but claimed for Islam. The Kaaba becomes now a sacred shrine of Islam, so that the only prayer and the only representation of the Kaaba will be dedicated to Allah. And 2 years after this, okay, we see in 632 the death of Muhammad. Okay, so it's after his death that some of the oral translations of Allah become embodied in what becomes the universal Quran. Okay, so the actual writing of the Quran is something that happens kind of a little bit over time, and it's scholars and some of the followers who are developing some of that work in the time period of the 4 caliphs. Okay, so a couple of things about the role of Muhammad and maybe about Islam, okay, and just a couple of things. Islam, of course, is incredibly monotheistic. The belief is that everything about the practice of Islam is connected to the submission of one God, and the God is Allah. There is the concept of heaven in Islam. There's also, again, we notice this, that, Muhammad is a prophet, a messenger, but not a divine figure, okay? So the Quran is not about the divinity of Muhammad. It is about, meant to be the words of Allah. The Quran is actually broken up into chapters, and it has a variety of different types of texts. It has some political theory, and it has some laws. It does have some recommendations in terms of behavior. It has quite a few surahs, okay? So think of those as like chapters. And we also will see a great deal of variety in the practices amongst Muslims throughout the world. Culture might matter a great deal, although the Quran is always read and prayed through Arabic. So that's something consistent. And there's also 5 pillars of Islam that are shared by all Muslims. Okay, and I think you may see these in their Arabic words also. Faith, the commitment to testifying there's no God but Allah, Muhammad is the messenger. Prayer, which occurs 5 times a day. There's a great deal of attention made to prayer. It's kind of a commitment that religion is always part of one's life. There's also a great deal of ways in which there can be challenges that may come up that might disenable somebody from prayer. There might be some ways that people can opt to do prayer at a later time. So there's a lot of kind of special circumstances that are allowed for. Charity is a very big, significant aspect of Islam. Fasting during the month of Ramadan is very significant in terms of a sacrifice and a pilgrimage. Muslims commit to, if physically and financially able, being able to go on Hajj, which is a pilgrimage to Mecca, in which case there's a great deal of customs that are adhered to, including circumambulating around the Kaaba. Okay, and there are no priests or religious authorities. So unlike Western Europe, where there was a pope, and in Byzantine, where there was the emperor who had like distinct, religious authority, there is not really that type of like religious hierarchy in Islam. We don't really have individuals who play the role of popes. There is a scholar class that's very significant, the ulama. They become ways in which the Quran, the Hadith, some other earlier decisions end up being interpreted, and we see the law code of Sharia becoming kind of a meaningful system of law that will apply to Muslims throughout the Islamic Empire. There will also be a court system and qadis. Those are judges who are serving under Sharia law. The idea of law is generally very significant with Islam and is very connected to the Quran. Okay, so that is, for the most part, really significant. There is very little separation between political and religious authority. Okay, so this idea that after Muhammad's death there was no successor creates some challenges for the community, because there is at the point in 632 what seems to be a lack of a authority figure to kind of lead the community. Followers at the time will select Abu Bakr. He was a close confidant of Muhammad. He's also a wealthy merchant that people know, and he is Muhammad's father-in-law. So there's a variety of things that make him a good candidate, and he is the first of the caliphs, and he is the first of what's known as the 4 rightly guided caliphs. These caliphs are selected by the community. Okay, and so Abu Bakr's role is political leader. He also has some military leadership as well as religious leadership. Okay, so we did do at various points the audios, and I'm just going to suggest here that you look back at your audios to kind of answer these certain questions. Where do we really see the expansion of the 4 rightly guided caliphs? Where do they expand? Where do the Umayyads expand? What led to the Sunni Shia split? And what forms of government were established to rule the Islamic Empire between 632 and 750? You all did great jobs on your audio, so take a look back at that material. And just to remind you, this is the timeline of the 4 caliphs. You can see some of them are only ruling for about 10 years, and we know that there's contention. Every time there's new elections, there's going to be questions about who is it that's really appropriate to follow the role of what Muhammad had been. These are not seen as prophets, so the caliphs are essentially deputies. They are in power in place of the prophets, but they're given some significant power, there's significant decision making, and we know that the Sunni Shia split will have its connections to initially the decisions about the caliphs. Okay, in the 661 to 750 period, we have the rise of the Umayyads, which is essentially Muawiyah, who becomes the 5th caliph, who usurps power. When Muawiyah usurps power, he kind of starts what will be a dynastic line that is largely hereditary. Okay, that becomes some of the differences there. Another reminder for you is to look at some of the Bentley and Mackay text. The Mackay text is called Rise of the Umayyads. The Bentley text is about the entire Islamic Empire. And there was also some reading excerpts by Peter Frankopan. I would look at those as well. And this just refers you to some of the readings that are present on Schoology. Okay, to remind you, we're looking at some of the first four caliphs, and we do see a great deal of initial military conquest into Syria, into Egypt, Byzantine Empire, parts of the Sassanid Empire of Persia. What are some of the biggest arguments that historians make for why there were some successes? We do know that the Islamic armies, contrary to what would be expected, they're actually very well disciplined, well trained, and have a good command of the geography of the region. They fight well in what is more dry of a climate, and they ultimately also have the Diwan, which is kind of an incentive base, lots of ways that we see the conquest occur. Sometimes some of the spoils of conquest get split up amongst the soldiers, so there's some incentives for individuals to join. Also, people who join into the army do take on the religion of Islam, so there's also incentives in terms of that. We know that the Byzantines and the Sassanids had been fighting each other. They are perhaps weakened. There's a plague at one point that also weakens them. There's a great deal of economic ambition. Some of the cities that are taking over become very significant. The question of religious zeal is one that historians debate. How much, the religion is seen as like kind of the need to spread Islam. Traditionally, this was a very common argument, and this was seen kind of as a religious crusade of sorts, where the need was to spread the religion of Islam. Largely, historians question that today. Why? Because we know that there's a great deal of submission. We know that some societies will never even fight, and maybe there are heavy degrees of conversion to Islam. So there's a great deal of questions about how much it was religious zeal. It seems that these other arguments are probably stronger in terms of some more modern day historians, that this was about land, it was about territory, it was about control of cities, less than a religious war. Some other things keeping in mind, the message of Islam embodied in the Quran was a great deal of charity, equality, and hope. There are particular social classes of people that may have found themselves very incentivized to become Muslim as a result of some of those messages. There's also quite a few groups of people, Christians and Jews, for example, that were mistreated under the Byzantines or perhaps the Sassanids. So there are perhaps some ways in which some of those groups will convert. And Christians and Jews are seen as people of the book. So regardless of the military degree of the conquest, the rule under the Islamic Empire, even though it's a military rule, largely allows for a great deal of religious tolerance at this point in the Islamic Empire. We do see, however, that non-Muslim peoples do get restricted. There are restrictions placed on where they can put, say, for example, churches or synagogues. There's a tax, the jizra. The tax is something that they have to pay, generally in lieu of being in the military service, which they're unable to do if they're non-Muslim. And, there's also a great deal of segregation in the Umayyad society, in which the Arab conquerors are essentially living in kind of barracks, outside of the communities in which they conquered. They're collecting taxes, but a good amount of lifestyle is happening as it was prior. The continued Arab expansion will take the Umayyads across northern Africa and also into southern Spain and into northwest, what is the area of the Indian Peninsula. And we see, all the way into Europe, the Islamic forces will be pushed back at the Battle of Tours in southern France. Okay, so there is some opportunities for the Islamic Empire to conflict with Western Europeans. There is a great deal of political disunity. This speaks a little bit to the Sunni and Shia rift, which builds over time, but we know that there is a civil war in the time period of the fourth caliph. This is Ali. The war is about the right to rule. Muawiyah, who's an Umayyad, will ultimately challenge the right to rule of Ali, and there is a challenge because there is a feeling that perhaps Ali took power after one of the other four caliphs. So there's like this continual new caliph that creates challenges in terms of should that caliph be the rightful leader. We know that the Shia become the group that is really going to seek the way in which the caliphs should be having a direct bloodline to the prophet. So Ali becomes kind of the really significant figure for the Shia. Prior to Ali, they had been hoping Ali would become the caliph, and the Shia become kind of a faction of supporters of Ali. They generally see Ali as the rightful caliph. Perhaps Muhammad had indicated this. Perhaps this is because Ali is seen to be bloodline to Muhammad, and there becomes a belief system connected to the Shia that is distinctly unique compared to the other group, which will be the Sunni. Okay, the Umayyads will come to power and ultimately be a Sunni group, although some of the kind of challenges between the Sunni and the Shia escalate into the Umayyad rule. The Sunni Shia division does come about with the selection of Abu Bakr. There become kind of the questions of the bloodline. After the assassination of Uthman, there are enemies of Ali led by Muawiyah. Ali ends up being assassinated in 661, and the heirs of Ali are also then supported by the Shia for being potentially caliphs, and the heirs of Muawiyah and the Umayyad family and the heirs of Ali will be involved in a major battle in 680. So this escalation of events become part of the important narrative that Shia identify with. The key things really, this rift rather, really comes about because of questions about who should be the caliph, whether or not the bloodline to Muhammad. And there's also some discussion about the role of an imam, that the caliph should play a certain leadership role in terms of being a religious leader of the community, and there's questions about who can do that best. Okay, so the Shia consistently support Ali or the heirs of Ali, and will seek the rightful Okay, so the other big thing just to note, and this is just some things that are, connection to some things that were already mentioned, so I won't go on here, but the idea of the scholar community, the Sharia, and also the ways in which decisions are made. The Islamic Empire is massive, and there's probably some ways in which different qadis, different, places are probably operating to some degree under interpretations of the Quran. And so religious scholars may be operating in some ways separately, but their decisions and their ideas also get written down and connected to the larger Sharia. So there is kind of what is like prescribed in a sense, the way people should live their daily lives. And this is significant because it speaks to the role of Islamic law through the Sharia, something that's a common entity, a common kind of factor for everyone living in the Islamic Empire. Even though there are Christian courts, for example, in some cases, some people choose to use the Islamic court system because it is deemed to be so fair. Okay, if we look at the Umayyads, and this takes you into some of the things that you did in your Umayyad and Abbasid compare and contrast, some of the really big takeaways, right? What is it that the Umayyad really do? First of all, they're not in power all that much. It's like a blip in terms of the Islamic Empire. They are conquerors. They also shift the capital to Damascus, right? The family of Muawiyah had power there. Muawiyah was the former governor of Damascus. So Syria becomes really the capital in a sense. The military elite really rule the show, and they are making decisions. They are the leaders. They're kind of top dogs. folks in the social hierarchy. There's also going to be a great deal of independence for conquered peoples. There's some negotiations. People might have some religious establishments built. So this is kind of very localized, what treatment might be, but for the most part, seem to be very, very tolerant for the time. There is Sharia law, which is also going to help to establish rules of trade that are commonplace throughout the entire empire. Caliphs will pass down the role to their sons. Okay, so the son of Muawiyah will ultimately become the next caliph. And, throughout the rule of the Umayyads, there are a variety of discontented groups, including those who are seen as Shia. They are not in favor of having the Umayyads in power. There's also non-Arab Muslims who seem to be displaced, and lots of people who see the Umayyads as very lavish. Largely, the Umayyads separate themselves in palaces because they are worried about assassination attempts, but this also leads to a lifestyle that seems cut off from the society and is seen as problematic. Important things about the Dome of the Rock or the Great Mosque of Damascus. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about this. You can certainly spend a little bit of time checking them out. This is demonstrative of Umayyad architecture. You can see the strong, heavy Byzantine, the mosaic and all of that style here. The Dome of the Rock, of course, is in Jerusalem. It is not a mosque, but yet is next to a mosque that ultimately is symbolic for a couple of reasons. Muslims believe that Muhammad took a night journey to Jerusalem where he ascended into heaven and met with other prophets. It is that the Dome of the Rock is symbolizing. It also has at its center a stone which some believe to be where Abraham was told to sacrifice his son. So there's some significant things about the Dome of the Rock. It also has some political messaging. It does establish in what is already a city that has meaning for Christians and Jews. For Jews, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is in Jerusalem, and the first temple that was destroyed for Jews is in Jerusalem. So very, very significant, representations, and the Dome of the Rock adds Islam to this very sacred city for many. The Great Mosque of Damascus is significant for its size, its beauty, and just to establish some degree of kind of a we're present and here in the city of Damascus. In terms of some big differences about the Abbasids come to power in 750. There is a conflict. You probably remember about, the family killed at the dinner. The Abbasids are part of a revolution. There's a great number of people who are seeking to oust the Umayyads. This grows largely in the area of Persia, but this becomes a significant change of government. Persian bureaucrats are now going to be encouraged to be active in the government. So Muslims largely, but Arabs and non-Arabs. The Abbasids rule in a very cosmopolitan and urban fashion. They are a trading center. Cities will be connected by scholarship and by trade. The caliph's powers maybe elaborate a little bit more. They become a little bit more based on protocol. There's an assistant to the caliph that also has some power. And the caliph will establish local emirs to rule regional areas. And there's a great deal of independent power for some of the emirs, who in some cases will establish their own power to be greater than that of the caliph and will take their people and opt out, essentially, of the Abbasid Empire. They will move the capital to Baghdad, and of course we see a variety of important caliphs, some of which you noted in your scholars, but we're talking about the rule of Caliph Harun al-Rashid is maybe really significant in the early 800s. Baghdad becomes a tremendous city. It is a round city. It has a great deal of design and development to it. It focuses on the power of the political system and also on the religion of Islam, and it is very, very much related to scholarship. There are administrative priorities. This is going to be a problem-solving empire. What is it that the government can do to keep more records, to facilitate taxation, things like that? We see an entire culture surrounding the very significant study of the Quran. This is going to be emphasized in schools. This is also going to be emphasized in scholarship. There is slavery in this society, as there is in most of the societies that we're looking at. Initially, the group that becomes enslaved first are Turks, who are non-Muslims initially. Oftentimes, slavery is connected in Islamic societies to non-Muslims. Muslims did not enslave other Muslims, so this became, in different Islamic societies, different groups become enslaved. And slaves are purchased. Turks are seen to have a great deal of military training, and they become very instrumental in the military as enslaved military people, military soldiers. Women are also enslaved and may provide domestic work and stuff like that. So there is a social hierarchy, but many groups of people, including non-Arabs, are in this society. There's the dhimmis. The dhimmis would be the Christians and the Jews, sometimes protected people. In a lot of cases, dhimmis had some political roles. They did pay tax, but they might have some political leadership. They might also have a role in scholar. And we know that there are changes for women. So without going into a great deal of detail in this, look in the Bentley text, we do see that there are some interpretations of Sharia law that are not maybe progressive in terms of women's rights. And some of these have some cultural connections. Some of these are related to interpretations of the Quran that start to shift and change. While the Quran doesn't change, sometimes the interpretations may become more conservative. And in terms of culture, areas like Byzantine, even under the Christian Byzantine leaders, women were often secluded and veiled to protect their modesty. In some cases, some of those cultural customs might have been picked up by people in the Islamic Empire. Okay, so by 900, the Abbasid Empire politically, we're kind of focusing here on some political commentary, the political system is starting to fragment. Cordoba goes its own way. It really always had. Tunisia and Khorasan, okay, kind of like in modern day Iran, northern Africa for Tunisia. And we actually see the Shia powers take on some political control in a variety of places, either temporarily, as in the case of Baghdad, or permanently in the case of Egypt. The Fatimids will have some significant control, and Cairo will become a very significant city of scholarship, and that's more in the 900s, right? By the time we get to the Crusades, which happen after the 1000 time period, we see a lot of the Muslims who are involved in the Crusades being representative of the group of people we would call the Fatimids. The Seljuk Turks, outside group that come in and migrate, sometimes conquest, sometimes migrate, sometimes enslaved, and then eventually as converts. The group of ethnic Turks and Turkic language speakers becomes larger and larger, becomes very instrumental. Largely Seljuk Turks will become the powers, the political powers in the Abbasid Empire, whereas the Abbasids themselves become more almost like symbolic names in power officially, but not really in reality. And Baghdad largely will fall to the Turks by 1055. This is when we see the Seljuk Turks really calling the shots of what's going to happen in the Islamic Empire. And we also see the Turks leading to large-scale migration due to some conquests in places like Anatolia, something you read about toward the last day of our Okay, in the last few comments, I'm just going to keep really brief. We know that the translation movement and some of the focus areas like astronomy, cartography, medicine, math, this whole question about the scientific method, lots of historians now would say there is some significant progress made in the development of science that happens in the Islamic Empire. Clearly, a lot of things are borrowed. Ancient Greek texts, paper from China, a variety of things that you noted in class, but there's also some development and of ideas, of commentaries, of putting information together in new ways, and largely some evidence of experimentation, perhaps most with Al-Haytham, who documented his experiments so others could repeat them. But there's a great deal of significance in terms of the way in which the Islamic scholars do some things that are different. The House of Wisdom is largely what we would call a library, but it also becomes a place of collaboration, scholars with each other and scholars with state leaders. Something that you might be interested in is the development of an Islamic map, which is distinct because it's flipped. This was common in Islam. If you were to flip this over, I might have an image of it flipped. This is what it looks like in what you just checked out. This is what it would look like flipped. And of course, we can see the Arabian Peninsula, smack in the middle of the map, which is kind of the way, of course, the Islamic Empire would see the world. This would be the area of Asia, maybe including China. And this would be maybe some of the area of Africa, kind of what is notable, maybe south, and then this might be the area of Europe. So it's kind of an interesting map. It is from the time period of around 1000, and it does suggest kind of some of the cartography of the time. All right, last big slide. Okay, so there are two slides here about the economy, and I think a lot of you have this in your notes. We do have a wealthy society, largely because of trade, right? So we have long distance trade. The empire is collecting tax dollars. There are some times when this is weaker than others. The empire isn't always rich and wealthy. When it is rich and wealthy, we do get more scholarship, we do get more trade. So, wealth has its consequences. Roadways do get built. Roadways for walking, for camels. Some of this is not roadways that we would consider, but there's attention paid to routes that people are taking that are going to be common. There's also going to be some water irrigation, okay, so that there is a effort to kind of enable people to go back and forth from Mecca and also back and forth across the trade. There's also a connection to larger trade routes, so in Africa, the Silk Road, etc. There are lots of standardization within laws and measurements. So something that the Islamic Empire gets right. This entire huge trade block is going to be consistent in terms of laws. So we don't see, like modern day issues of like tariffs and things like that between groups of people who are trying to trade. It's very friendly to trade. There's a great deal of agricultural diversity. A lot of you noted that in your notes. That becomes important. Lots of food production, lots of places throughout the empire that become able to grow food that they previously did not know existed. This lends itself to increases in nutrition and lots of merchants and banking and craftsmen that are dedicated, and farmers, of course, who are going to be dedicated to this. Textiles, become a huge product in the Islamic Empire. And of course, paper, which is borrowed from China, drives a lot of activity, commercial activity, and book selling. Okay, and lastly, some of the social things about the Abbasid Empire, and a lot of this would be significant. There's a great deal of cultural diversity. It is significantly diverse. There is also a lot of latitude for enabling some of that diversity. There is Arabic and Persian cultures, especially during the Abbasid. We see the emphasis on Persian cultures. Lots of you are familiar with the story of Aladdin, and that is something that is a fictional story that is kind of from this time period and really has roots in the experiences of Baghdad at its height. The role of women in a lot of cases, you noted this well in your notes. There is a great deal of ways in which you can argue that the role of women is expanded, especially early in Islam. Religiously, women have access to religious life in the same capacity as men. Even if they're segregated in religious activity, they have equal access to Allah. This is something that is not gender-based at all. There is also, however, into the Abbasids, a little bit more of a restriction on women in terms of ensuring their modesty, and we see in some cases a great deal more emphasis on a patriarchal public sphere of life, political sphere of life for women. And some of that is also connected to other societies at the time who are very similar in terms of gender roles. Okay, I hope this helped. This is the very last slide. Art and culture. We do see a lot of influences. Some of you noted Indian influences, Arab, Turkish, Persian, Byzantine. So architecture and art have a great deal of influences. Persian art tends to be a little different than other areas where we see a lot of emphasis on arabesque or kind of repeated geometric ornamentation. This is more the case in the Arabic fashion of Islamic art. Some of this we might also see in Persia, but we also see miniature human forms in Persia. So there's a variety of differences depending on what influences you're looking for, but there are a great deal of ways in which, mathematics and beauty in form and symmetry come into play. Also, calligraphy is seen as an art form. The words from the Quran that are rewritten in a calligraphy fashion and sometimes rewritten on buildings in order to beautify them is also a significant art form. Okay, have a great rest of the day, everyone. I hope this helped. Be well.